Well, welcome back to my second part of this interview with Noah Whinston, the CEO of Immortals. We are talking now about CSGO, actually, and the Immortals side of CSGO. Previously talked about League of Legends. But let's go ahead and dive in. How are things going for you on the CSGO front and with the team and all that?
So I think our Counter-Strike team is a bit of an inconsistent team right now. We have some tournaments where we put up incredible performances, like our top 4 run at IEM Katowice, where we only lost to FaZe, who's one of the best teams in the world right now, compared to a pretty disappointing result at Star Ladder in Kiev over this last weekend. So I think what we're doing right now, especially with a new roster, right? Steel, the in-game leader, is relatively new to the team. FNX, who we acquired from SK, and the trade for Phelps is even newer. So I think what we're trying to do right now is really define our identity and define our play style in a way that brings a little more consistency. Because we certainly have the skill, right? These are some of the most talented players in the world in terms of their game sense, in terms of their aim. And now it's more just about kind of combining these 5 really skilled players into a singular team with tactics. And I'm looking forward to DreamHack Austin as our next opportunity to show that.
Yeah, remind me, how long ago was it that you got into the CSGO scene and Immortals picked up their first roster?
So we acquired this roster from Tempo Storm back in May of 2016.
That's right. So almost a year.
Yes.
What have you learned during that time? Because this is still like less than a year of CSGO involvement for you.
Yeah. Learned a lot of things. Learned that Brazilians are very different from Koreans. Yeah. They require very different types of attention and coaching. I've learned that there's also like a very different mentality in Counter-Strike compared to League of Legends in terms of what matters, the way that teams and players treat each other, all of that. And I've learned, the CSGO community is a very different community than the League of Legends community. Not for better or worse, just different,
yeah.
And that requires a different approach.
In what ways are they different? I'm actually kind of curious, being mostly a League guy myself.
I think League fans more heavily value the type of content that exists a lot in League, right? The narrative, well-produced content, even just individual streaming content. Like those are kind of things that League fans expect you to do if you're an organization, right? And they really value it if you do. If you look at Counter-Strike, there are almost no organizations producing kind of consistent narrative content around their Counter-Strike teams. And some of them produce videos, but they're mostly just like highlight videos or frag videos. Very few pro players stream very much. There's just, I think, more of an overall focus on events and competition than there is on kind of the behind the scenes and the content that League of Legends has.
Yeah, do you think that's just because they're not used to seeing that stuff, yeah. And if you throw it out there, they'll start to really appreciate it? It's kind of like a mentality thing, or is there just like, they just don't care as much?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely a mentality thing. Like it's a kind of build it and they will come. I think as more teams invest more heavily in creating that type of content and that type of that type of content, more people will be accustomed to watching it. People are already responding really well to some of the content we've put out. They're responding well to some of the content that Big, the German team, has put out. I know Envious has done some as well. I know Astralis has done some as well.
Right.
But it's also part of the player's mindset too, right? Players need to get more in the groove of being used to having video crews around them, creating content, giving good interviews before, during, and after an event. In order to more deeply connect with their fans beyond what their fans can see on the actual stream of the competition itself.
You mentioned the Brazilian component of your team and how much that plays into it. What has it been like working in that scene? I think, honestly, and perhaps this is just ignorance on some of the other organizations, but Immortals was one of the first teams that I started to see on social media and, do kind of like both language posts and try to reach kind of both audiences. So, what's that whole experience been like? Yeah,
so, I mean, it's not a surprise that as Brazilian players, a big part of their fan base is Brazilian. And, our responsibility as an organization, our reason for existence is to connect with fans, whoever and wherever they are. So if 40% of the people that are the target of a tweet or the target of a Facebook post are Brazilian, it makes sense that we should be trying to reach them in Portuguese as well as in English for the rest of our fans.
Certainly there is like the wonderful philosophical mindset of, let's reach our fans wherever they are. You are also a business owner. Like, do you find that there is value in building a Brazilian fan base for you? Do you think that will reward you? I mean, do you ship Immortals gear to Brazil yet?
So we're still pretty bad at serving our Brazilian fan base.
Sure.
And we're trying to make some improvements there when it comes to merch, when it comes to how well we target them. I think.
But could Immortals have like a Brazilian sponsor or something like that?
We probably could, based on the scale we're at now. I'd say there is value to building engaged fan bases. And whether that fan base is in Brazil or not, like, yeah, like that has different values. We monetize it in different ways. Like, we grow it in different ways. But I'm never going to say no to people that want to support us. And if we can make a small investment to tweet in Portuguese at the same time as English, and that's what helps people follow us, I see no reason why we wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Let's broaden the conversation out to the rest of CSGO. At the end of last year, as I was enjoying my holidays,
Same.
There was a lot of interesting stuff happening in the CSGO scene, especially in North America. Yeah. How have you sort of, I don't want to say recovered, but how's life on the other side of all the PEA, or do you pronounce it PEA? I've never gotten this clear. Okay, so you don't like the PEA thing, just PEA.
So you're going to continue to do that?
Yeah, maybe,
yeah,
yes.
Okay.
No. It's PEA for your purposes.
On camera, at least.
Sure. What has sort of been the lessons from that whole situation, and how are things looking on the other side of that? Because it was kind of this uncomfortable Cold War for a bit, right?
So I think, as much as the public perception of that was like, it's this group of owners versus this group of players, I think there was a lot more diversity within the experience of owners and players within the PEA around that situation.
I mean, certainly that was how it was messaged, and all these messages going out. Like,
yeah, understood. Communication was very centralized, right? But of course, behind the scenes, right, it's not like I'm refusing to talk to my players and my players are refusing to talk to me, and we're only communicating through these public letters, right? Sure. So every team owner had a very different approach in the way that they talked with their players about it, and at least on our end, that conversation was pretty cordial and mutually understanding, right? Like, I think that just our approach to building the PEA, as much as it didn't appeal to the North American players of most of the North American teams that we were talking with, really didn't appeal to the Brazilian players, because their priorities were just very different in terms of what they care about and how they want to set themselves up for their futures. So honestly, like upon talking to my team and understanding more about their priorities, it became more evident that this wasn't a good structure for them. So the idea that players voted down wanting to participate in it wasn't really a surprise, and it's not something I'm particularly upset about. And it's also not something that's really damaged the relationship with my team in the long term, right? We still cooperate. We're still very friendly. I mean, I was just down at the house earlier this morning talking with them. So I think that while I can't speak for every team about the fallout from that incident, at least for me and the Immortals CSGO team, it was a good time to kind of get aligned on what our goals are and what our expectations are. And obviously, I wish that could have been done without going through all of that, because it's stressful and nobody should have to.
One of the very interesting parts of one of those letters, and I apologize, I don't have the statement in front of me, I'll have to paraphrase, but it was this sort of PEA saying, hey, people can decide whatever league they want to be in, and players decide not to be a part of this. But before then, there was a statement made like, we will invest those resources we would have invested in this league into some other esport or some other activity. When I read that, I was kind of like, well, where does that go? Because it's certainly not going into League of Legends. That's already this kind of stable system. I couldn't really look at any other esport that's out there at the time and interpret that as being an opportunity. I mean, what was the meaning behind that? Yeah,
well, I don't want to get too literal with what that statement meant, right? It wasn't like, oh, we're not going to put it in CSGO. Instead, we're going to put it in game X.
Right.
I think more so what we meant is just, these are real financial resources that are being risked by teams, right? It wasn't like there was some outside investor fronting all the money behind wanting to set up a PEA league. It was the team's money. And so, if the opportunity isn't there in Counter-Strike, that's fine, but then we're going to invest those resources into different places that make more sense, right? Yeah. Whether that's on an individual team level, maybe it's on a collective level, right? Maybe we decide we want to make like collective level content, or work on platforms and products together as a group rather than just as individuals. But that wasn't really meant to be like a specific prescription for the players not wanting to do PEA League. It was more meant as, I think we felt like the attitude of the players at the time was, yeah, you should do PEA League and lose money on it in addition to doing EPL. And from our perspective, that just wasn't really a viable option.
Sure.
So we just wanted to express that, like, hey, no harm done if you don't want to be here. It's fine. We're not going to force you. But at the same time, you can't have both.
Yeah.
You got to pick one.
What is the current status of PEA? I mean, because we heard this, and then I feel like it's gotten kind of quiet.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing a lot of talking internally to figure out what that next opportunity is, right? I think Counter-Strike was a pretty obvious one where we felt like both the player and fan community was being underserved by existing leagues and existing structure. I think the second most valuable option is still a little up in the air.
Yeah.
And certainly we're not looking to follow up on the PEA CSGO situation by rushing headlong into something else without considering it pretty carefully.
So does that mean that CSGO is kind of tabled for PEA right now?
I mean,
certainly the league is obviously not going to happen, but is there, because I always interpreted the PEA announcement as being very CSGO centric, and so I'm kind of wondering, like, in a world where from talking to you, it sounds like CSGO is not really a big conversation piece there anymore. I wonder what that league or what that group means.
Well, I mean, right now we're more focused on kind of overarching things, right? Like, who are we as an organization? What do we want to be doing outside of trying to run a league? Right. And I think those philosophical conversations are really important to take our time in determining, because that's what chooses for us where we're going to go from here. And I think for us, the reason that PEA was so CSGO focused out of the gate is because we felt like a lot of the negative reaction from the community towards WESA and other kind of quote unquote governing bodies of esports was kind of a lack of understanding of how that affects their experience and the community in a tangible way.
Yeah.
So the last thing we wanted to do is say, hey, here's this group of team owners, you're not going to see anything that we do, and you will have no idea the impact that we are having on the scene. And we wanted to kind of create something that you could like see and feel and hold and see that this is the result of all of our efforts. So at least on our end, that's why we were very kind of product focused with the launch of PEA. And there's always going to be a risk there, because if people don't like the product, they're not going to like you as an organization. And that's fine. So I think from here we're just figuring out best steps forward.
Very good. Well, that wraps up our CSGO section here of the interview. Part 1, League of Legends. Part 3 will be Overwatch and maybe some miscellaneous esports conversation as well. Stay tuned for that.